Welcome to JavaScript Object-Oriented Programming 1. Today we're going to be getting into creating classes and putting in properties and methods within those classes. We're not explaining the concepts of OOP, just how to do it in JavaScript. So I have 3 files set up for today. We have the index file, which we're going to leave blank for now. We have a panel.js and a jQuery.js. JavaScript, jQuery isn't necessary to create classes or anything like that, but I'm going to be using it for DOM manipulation because the classes we're going to be making panel are going to add elements and do lots of fancy things, so it's a lot easier to do it via jQuery than it is to do traditional JavaScript, just for ease, so we can focus on what's important. So to get started, I'm going to open up this file, and to create a class in JavaScript is very unusual. Usually in a language you would actually do this, and in JavaScript class is a keyword, but I'm not sure what it's used for, to be honest. I think it might be a Microsoft thing, and it's not actually how it's done. A class in JavaScript is that you just define another function, and this becomes your constructor. So we now have a class called panel, and we can actually do new panel like so, and when we do this it calls the code what's in here. So we're going to make the constructor, and in the constructor we can give it let me explain. Usually with classes you have private, protected and public properties. In JavaScript you basically only have public if you do the object-oriented code one way, or you have public and private. There's no way of getting protected attributes, meaning that if you extend the class, the early attributes the child class will be able to look at is public. So the 2 ways that we can work with this is we can either define properties in here using var, in which case this will be a private property because it's only available inside the scope of this function. We can make public properties by saying this dot and the property name, and then give that a value. Similarly with methods, this would be a private method because it can only be accessed in here. And this would be a public method which can be accessed. So if we did new panel, we could call public method like so. I prefer this way of creating classes where everything is essentially defined in the constructor. The only problem with that is I think that every time you create a new instance of that class, it processes this function code, assigns the variables and assigns the methods and assigns the private methods and properties, etc. every single time, so it might be a bit slower. The other way, which I'd grant you public attributes and properties, is you get the class name, so panel, you find the prototype property of panel, and the prototype is essentially the blueprint of this class. So we can now say panel.prototype, and then we can say property equals and give it a value, or we can say panel.prototype.method and give it a function, and then if we did a new panel we can actually call the method or get the property. With any class, regardless of what the class is, if it hasn't been defined, so if we say equals new panel, we can actually assign new properties and methods on the fly, as well as overwriting old ones. So we can say just new prop equals value, so not this, sorry, p that new prop equals value, so we can reassign it. So for these lessons, however, I'm going to be using the full on in the constructor method just because I like having some sort of private variables. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this panel class, and it's going to have some properties in its constructor. We're going to give it a width and a height, and we're going to give it a parent element, which we're going to prefix with a $, because it's going to be a jQuery object. So, first things first, we're going to create a new element. So we're going to say element. So this will be like the DOM element that is our panel. It represents the panel, will be the div that we're using. So it's going to be jQuery object of a new div element on there, and then we can then use the attribute method. I'm going to give it a class of panel. The reason I'm using it like this rather than just saying class and then panel is I might want to add extra attributes later. And then we're going to call the CSS function. I'm going to say width, which is width, and then height of height. And then we're going to set some other ones, so position absolute, like so. Top is going to be 50%. Left is going to be 50%. So that will get the top left corner of this element in the center of the document, the window. So I'm going to change that to then margin left with a minus width divided by 2, and then we're going to do the same for the top margin using height. Now with the panel, we can actually detect if they entered a value for each of these. The way you can do it, you can either use the arguments array, and the arguments array basically is like 0 would be width, 1 would be height, 2 would be parent. What I like to use is if type of parent equals undefined, because also that way we can also check if it's just null or if they just didn't enter it, because if we just did arguments 2, if they entered in false for the parent rather than just not supplied a value, because JavaScript doesn't actually check how many, doesn't restrict how many arguments can pass into a function. We can name them, but someone could actually just call panel like that and it'll still run. So what we can also do with that, knowing that, we can also do if arguments length is less than 2, meaning these two are required, we can return false. Which means that we need a width and a height for this class to actually create itself. Which is, I'd say it's a good idea to do that with some of these things. Sometimes you might not want to do that, you might just want to silently fail and still create an object. Depends what you want to do with these things. But I think when you're creating elements on the in the document, then you should always check that you've got everything you need. So if the parent is undefined, meaning that they haven't entered one, we're going to assume the document. So we're just going to get the document and then the document element. So and then if it has been entered but it's null, so they may have gotten an object that doesn't exist, we're going to return false again because we've got nothing to add it to. And then we're going to do parent dot append, and then we're going to append our own element. And before we test this, I'm going to make a new file called panel.css. And here we're going to say anything in the panel class. We're going to give it a background of RGBA, so make it transparent, border radius 5 pixels, and just to make sure. Now if we open this up, nothing should happen. Yep, nothing happens because we haven't created one. If we enter nothing, nothing should happen again. Let's enter 400 by 400. And nothing happens again. Do we have an error? No, we do not. Oh wait, no, we do have one. It's right here. See if we can highlight where it is. Oh, so it is there. It's just our CSS. I'm an idiot. Yep, I actually need to put our CSS in there. And here we go, we've now got a panel. So that's pretty cool. What do I want to do? Open this, and then we could, let's make a div here. Let's give it an ID of test div. Yeah. Let's give it into mainline style, bad practice, but whatever. Give a model 150 pixels and a background light grey. Oh, need to give it a width. Okay, so we've got this nasty looking thing. Position relative, yes. One thing I might want to do in here is actually have a z index. Give it a z index, so something really high like 100, just to make sure that it shows up on top of everything, like so. So what we can do here now is, inside our HTML, we can actually, we'll use this jQuery thing here to run on DOM load to make sure our entire HTML is run, and then we'll give it our test div object, and now our panel's inside our test div. So we've now got it so we can create multiple panels very easily in any element we want, like so. So at the moment that's not really doing much. You could just make a function, but it's good to have the object. But what can we do with it now? So one thing you might want to do is add, which we're going to do, should I say, is add a show and close method. So I'm going to actually have a private property here called open, which defaults to false, and we're actually going to set the display to this by default as none. And then over down here, after all this code, we're going to define a this.show method and a this.close. Let's call open and close, like so. And then we can do if it's already open, then return false. Open equals true. If not open, return false. So in here we're going to get our element, and we're going to use the fade in function of jQuery, and let's give it a time of 500 milliseconds, like that. And then here we're going to use element.fade out 500 milliseconds, and then once it's finished we'll say open equals false. The reason that I set the open false in this callback function here rather than straight away is I always like to say that even if a panel or a window or anything like that that you're creating is even the least little bit visible, so even if it has an opacity of 1, the display is blocked, then it's open. So it's a lot more useful for checking things. in my opinion. And we can also make a function here called this.isOpened, which will return the status of open, so we can now check if it is open anywhere. So if we refresh, we've now got something like that, and then now we can call p1.show, or open even, and now it fades in. Now we can extend this to have a property in it, so we can call it a callback, and then we can put callback in here. And then in here I'm going to say if callback and callback call, meaning that it's a function. We can use the call method. Well, someone may have given an object that has its own call method, but that's their choice to do. Generally, unless you write something like the new jQuery, you don't have to care about that much. We're going to do callback, call this, and any arguments that are passed in, so actually use apply for that one. Again, the arguments will be for this function, because it could have supplied an event or an object, and this will be wherever the function is in here, so it makes it so we went directly with this callback without going through this function first. So we can now do that, and so if we do that, we can now call p2.open, and now they'll open in sequence, so that's pretty cool. So we've now got a callback. Now these panels at the moment, we can't do anything with them. We can grab the element uniquely, we can't get the element to add text content or anything like that, so that is a big problem, really. So the way you can make it so the panel can extend content is you can do one of two things. You can make it so the element is actually a well, actually there's three ways you can make it so the element is a public property. We can make it so you can call a function to return the element, but it will return a reference to the object, so we might as well do a public property. Or you can make a function which allows you to add content. So I think we're going to do an add content one. So this dot we're just going to call it add function, and we're going to say content. And then we're going to do two things. We're going to say if it's a string, we're going to add to the inner HTML of the element. So if type of content equals string. So if we're using a string, else we're going to do element.append content. So anything else we're going to try and append it as an object. If it is a string, however, we're going to do element.append. HTML is equal to element.html plus content. So we're going to append to the HTML, so just raw text. And we might want to add a remove method, but I'm going to do this.clear equals function. And what we're going to do with that is we're going to say element.children.remove, which will remove any child elements and their events. So if you've added any event type things. So if we go in here now, let's say p.add, we're going to try the string first. So we've now got content in here. Look at that, it's pretty cool. And then in here we're going to say p2.add, let's make a h2. This is a jQuery object because there's a pronoun in here, and it'll actually interpret the HTML. So and as you can see, we've added an element, and I believe since we're using the jQuery method, we can actually do this. So if we add D, yep, we've now got a paragraph of text in here. So already with just a few methods and classes, we've now got a pretty nice panel type thing. So in the I think the next thing we're going to do is going to add a way to click it, and then we'll be done for this video. And next we're going to do inheritance and how we can extend this panel to do more things, either for a unique need or like a new generic class. So what we're going to do is first of all we're going to use we're going to do something that's a very good practice. When dealing with event handlers, whether it's you're going to be custom event handlers within your own class or something like onClick in jQuery or the DOM, the use of this, like for example here, the this here doesn't refer to this class. The this there returns to the HTML element, the div element that the panel refers to, the actual element, I think bracket 0. So a good thing to do is in your constructor is to say var underscore self or whatever equals this, which means no matter where you go you can refer to this variable and it'll always refer to the class we're in. So what we're going to do is that once the element is appended, we're going to element.click. Actually, we're going to do the new on method in jQuery. OnClick equals I think we can actually do this .close. So we might not even need that at all. Nope, doesn't work. That's all. Maybe our close function never actually worked. Oh, let's try, shall we? Nope, our close function does work. That's good. It's always about the debugging on these. Element.onClick this.close. Try self. I'd recommend using self anyway because it looks nice in my opinion. Nope, it doesn't work. That function isn't being called. How unusual. What if I just do click? Maybe I got the method wrong. Nope. Bizarre. Okay, we are getting the click. Here. So let's see what we can determine what's going on here. I've just realised what it is. It's the, I think it's, this is another problem with not using the prototype method, is that this .open isn't defined here. So if you need to use these, you need to put them down here. Like so. So that can be a problem. That is another downside to these, is these variables aren't defined until up here. Yeah, see, now we can close them. So sorry about that. One thing I have noticed that we should do is we should, in our close and show methods, we should call the stop method on the element, which means if, like so, we can stop it halfway through, because otherwise it would actually open before closing again. So it's it's looking pretty good so far. So hopefully you learned something like that about how classes work. You can do a lot with them. I would say most of the time what you'd be making for something good is something that represents a collection of DOM elements, so like an app or a widget or a panel, something like that. That's what I find the most useful. I wouldn't suggest making classes for like just code based stuff. I'd say something functional on the site is a good thing. So the next lesson, Object-Oriented 2, will be privatizing classes, which is somewhat interesting. It'll be a short one, and making static variables, etc. And then we'll go into inheritance, and then we'll be going into being able to make custom events and binding them to them, which will be pretty useful. It'll also allow us to do stuff like binding to every close event, every open event, instead of just using this callback. So hopefully you found that interesting, and I'll see you in the next video.